Alrighty guys, so we are going to be talking about the scientific method today. So just to make sure that we're following along with the live lecture, we want to get out a sheet of paper, and throughout the PowerPoint there are going to be some questions that you're going to see. So we want you to make sure to write down those answers, and you're going to submit them to Schoology, checking in with your teacher about how to actually submit those questions. Now, what is science? Science is the method of studying the natural world. So, a long time ago, we noticed these natural phenomena, tornadoes, hurricanes, volcanoes, and we were trying to figure out, okay, what is causing these things to happen? So, a lot of people came up with the idea that it was gods that controlled all these different elements. Right now, what's going on is Hurricane Laura and Hurricane Marco. That's in the Gulf of Mexico. It's unprecedented that we have 2 hurricanes in one location. So we got to be able to figure out, okay, what is going on with that? We noticed there are 2 hurricanes. Now we have to investigate why that's the case. Why are we having more hurricanes and stronger hurricanes throughout the years? So scientists use a system of questioning called the scientific method. The scientific method are these 6 common steps used in order to analyze a question and to break it down into its parts so that we can ultimately get an answer. So we have state the problem, gather information, all the way down to drawing conclusions. So this is not something I want you to write down yet. I have actually a very, very easy way for you to write this down. So this is the first thing I want you to write down. I want you to write down the 6 steps of the scientific method. Ask a question, research, gather information, hypothesis, experiment, analyze data, and drawing conclusions. What you're going to notice is that there's a shorthand, R-head. That R-head is a very, very easy way to remember all 6 steps of the scientific method. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to write that down. Now, the first step is stating a problem or asking a question. So, Mr. Ewald, what's been going on the last few months?
The coronavirus.
Oh, that's still a thing?
It is.
Okay, so we want to make sure that we try to figure out how to get rid of the coronavirus. And so we have the coronavirus located to the left, and we have an individual wearing a mask properly, nose covered, mouth covered, in order to make sure that we understand how this coronavirus is spread, and most importantly, how we get rid of it. Okay, so.
Just like this.
Nice, nice. So what is the question that we have about masks and the coronavirus? I'm going to give you a few seconds to go ahead and write that question down about what we want to ask about masks and about the coronavirus. Oh, that's me.
That's okay.
Oh, we having a problem?
Now, the second step to the scientific method is researching and gathering information. So we know a lot about other viruses. We know about the smallpox of 1918, and we know that due to the fact, the Spanish flu of 1918. So due to the fact of knowing that, we can use that kind of as a guide to what's going on with the coronavirus. So what are some resources that you guys can think about that we could use to look up information? So I'm going to give you guys a few seconds to think about that, jot some ideas down, and let's see what we can come up with. So Mr. Ewald, what do you think? What are some resources that we can use in order to look up information?
Having to do with the coronavirus, I would probably go to resources like the CDC, the World Health Organization, Any resource that you feel provides information that would help you find information about the coronavirus and what's going on with that in today's world.
Now, what do you think about Wikipedia? Do you think Wikipedia would be a resource that we could use and we could list as a reliable resource?
I think that Wikipedia would be a good start. There are some citations on Wikipedia. There is some editing that goes on there. So Wikipedia would be a good start, but you would want to find some more reliable, potentially better sources other than just Wikipedia.
Thank you very much, Mr. York. Now, forming a hypothesis is where we come up with an explanation for a problem. And what we can say is it's a prediction to what we think could happen with our experiment. So from the picture on the right, can you hypothesize what Bill Nye was trying to solve? So you can see that Bill Nye has his mask on. We had this candle here. So what do you think he's trying to do? Yeah, he's trying to blow the candle out using the mask. And that's exactly what we're going to set up as well. So our next question is going to be coming up with that particular experiment. We have 4 different types of masks. And what I want you to do is I want you to write a hypothesis down for each one of these masks. So number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. So writing a hypothesis is really, really simple. All you're going to write is, I hypothesize that, and whether or not you think the mask is going to blow out the candle. So for this first one, all you would have to say is, I hypothesize that the mask will blow out the candle. Okay, so guys, I'm going to give you guys a minute or two to think about all the different hypotheses, write them down, and we're going to do the experiment.
And I'll add in there too really quickly. If you have any questions that pop up, you may have had some pop up while Mr. Wen was speaking during the lecture. You can also put those in the chat. There's a live chat that's happening during this live stream. So if you want to throw some questions in there, we can try to get to those as we're going through this live video. All right?
You guys?
All right, so we have our candle, and we have all our masks. Now, Mr. Ewald is wearing a mask. I'm not. So you might be wondering, well, are we following the rules of the guidelines for the CDC and following safe schools? Absolutely. We're 6 feet apart. Whenever you're in the classroom and you're 6 feet apart, you're more than welcome to take off your mask as long as your teacher says so. Now, we're going to test this first one out. This is your surgical mask. What do you guys think? You think it's going to blow it out or not? We're going to take this candle, we're just going to give a nice big puff. Doesn't blow out the candle. So, Mr. Ewald, what would you say? Is this mask good for the coronavirus and preventing the spread of the coronavirus?
I would say that based on that test, that is a pretty efficient mask for protecting you from the coronavirus.
All right, KEA masks. Now remember, these are the masks that the Kentucky Educator Association sent us. Okay, so with that particular mask, we can see that not all masks are created equally. Okay, and this is the Fort Thomas mask that they sent us. What do you guys think? We're going to blow it out or not? So this was a really, really good mask that they sent us. So thank you very much, Fort Thomas, for being able to send that. And then this is the Gator mask that I've seen a lot of people wear, and we're going to see whether or not this is actually efficient or not. Okay, guys, so you got to be careful about what type of mask that you're going to wear and making sure that those particular masks are going to be good for protecting against the spread of the coronavirus.
Good.
So what we just did was we did an experiment. We controlled some variables and we wanted to make sure that we were testing for a specific question. Now you might be wondering, well, what is a variable? Well, a variable is a quantity that has more than one value. So if you were thinking about plants and you were thinking about fertilizers, you could possibly come up with different types of fertilizers to determine whether or not that fertilizer was advantageous for that plant to grow. The fertilizer would be the variable. Not only that, but whenever you're thinking about the plant's going to grow, it's going to grow taller, and so then height becomes a variable as well, because not all the plants are going to be the same height. So other possible factors that could include plant type, amount of sunlight, amount of water, all these are different variables because they contain different values. So the dependent variable is going to be the variable that we measure or that we collect data on. So this particular chart, you can see that this would be the dependent variable. It's what we measure. So the height after 2 weeks, we need to measure it for each one of these plants. And we can see that with this particular testing of fertilizers, we can see that 18 centimeter is going to be the highest or the tallest plant. Now, data can be measured in different ways. So you can have qualitative data, you can have quantitative data. So your qualitative data is going to be your categorical data. So sometimes it's just a simple yes or a no. Sometimes it's the type of color. Those are difficult to measure in terms of putting numbers on it. So we want to make sure that we have a category that separates that from quantitative data, which is continuous data. So these are going to be like your height, your weight, your number of people, and you can see a gradient of different types of data with quantitative data. Your independent variable is going to be the variable that we physically change, that we physically manipulate. So in this experiment, we're talking about fertilizers and whether or not different fertilizers work well. So we know that that is the independent variable because that is what we're physically changing. Another factor that's really important to think about whenever you're doing an experiment is your constants. So your constants are going to be variables that do not change over time. So we don't want to manipulate the amount of water. We don't want to manipulate the amount of sun. We want to keep them exactly the same. So that way, we know that if there's any change in this experiment, it's due to the fertilizer alone. And then the last variable we're going to talk about is the control. So the control is the standard of comparison. So in other words, it determines whether or not there was an effect with that independent variable. It does not receive the independent variable. So you can notice that this plant does not have any fertilizer at all. So it's going to be the control. Not only that, but we can see whether or not this fertilizer had an effect whenever we compare these two numbers, or whether or not this fertilizer had an effect whenever we compare this number, or whether or not this fertilizer had an effect if we compare those numbers. So, thinking back to the experiment that we just did with the masks and the candles, what was the dependent variable? So in other words, what were we measuring? Mr. Ewald, what were we measuring?
So in the experiment with the different types of masks, we were measuring whether or not you could blow out the candle while wearing the different types of masks.
So what would you say in terms of recording the data?
I would say that you would be recording basically a yes or no. Were you able to blow out the candle with the mask on, or were you not able to blow out the candle?
And qualitative or quantitative data?
So that would in fact be think about it at home, qualitative. So you would be recording qualitative data, basically a yes or a no with blowing out the candle.
what is the independent variable in this experiment? So in other words, what did we physically change? Mr. Ewald, what do you think? What were we physically changing in our experiment?
So if you think about that experiment with blowing out the candle using different types of masks, the independent variable, the variable that we as the experimenter changed, would have been the different types of masks. Very good.
What is the control in the experiment? So in other words, which one did not have the independent variable? So did we test that, Mr. Ewald?
We didn't actually do a control group for that experiment.
Do you think we need to?
In this case, I don't think that it is incredibly important. We would always want to have that as a backup, but yes.
Okay, so just in case you're wondering, hey, maybe that was a trick candle. Maybe we manipulated the data. We're going to go back. Okay, and we're going to just make sure, the same candle, I promise. Same lighter, I promise. Okay, no mask. So this is our control. Okay, so does wearing a mask spread the does not wearing a mask spread the coronavirus easily? Well, absolutely, because you're not blocking anything. You're not blocking any type of particulates or any type of water droplets from leaving your mouth. So that's one of the reasons, or actually the main reason, as to how masks prevent the transmission of the coronavirus. Okay, and what is the constant in this experiment? So in other words, what didn't change throughout the experiment? Mr. Ewald, what do you think?
You mentioned a few of them just a moment ago. We would want to use the same type of candle. We would want to use the same type of lighter. We would want to blow with the same force each time that we did it to make sure that we could control, keep that force of air constant. Anything that we can control that we would want to keep the same for each of those tests, those would fall into the constants for this experiment.
Now, what if you had different people? Do you think different people would affect the experiment?
I mean, it could, but we would want to control as much of those those constant variables. We would want to control as many of those as we possibly could.
Absolutely. So in that case, that's the reason why Mr. Ewald and I didn't switch, because, again, we could blow air out in a different rate. So we want to make sure that we control for that. Now, of course, Mr. Ewald could also conduct the experiment as well, and he would then be a constant for his experiment. Now, analyzing data. So analyzing data generally comes in the forms of charts, tables, and graphs. And so we want to be able to organize that. We need to be able to present that to our audience. And so for question number 8, what I would like you to do is make a chart to show the efficacy of the masks. So there are 4 masks altogether. So you could just put mask number 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then just write the results down to the right side of that chart.
And just for a quick reminder, if we look back at our setup, our surgical mask was mask number 1. So for your chart, you'd want to put surgical mask or mask number 1. Our cloth mask from the KEA, that was our mask number 2. We had the Fort Thomas mask, the gray one, that would be our mask number 3. And then we had that gator, the gator type mask, that would be mask number 4.
And then the last step to the scientific method is going back to your hypothesis and deciding whether or not we're going to support the hypothesis or not. So the reason why this one's so important is whether or not we need to be able to go back and look at what we did wrong with our experiment and what we could do better. So question number 9, was your original hypothesis supported? So going back to question number 2 and looking at your different hypotheses, all you would do for reviewing your hypothesis was say, no, my original hypothesis was or was not supported. The mask was or was not able to blow out the candle. And that's it. Just going through each one of those 4 hypotheses and making sure that we revise those and making sure that we're able to communicate our results to our colleagues and our peers. All right, so if you have any other questions, you're more than welcome to email me, email Mr. Ewald, or email Mrs. Becker about those questions. Make sure to turn in the questions by the end of your class period. Check with Schoology and your teacher for instructions on how to submit it. See whether or not your teacher has assigned any more work as well, because that's going to be important in making sure that we reinforce that work. And also note that the next time-bound event will be in small groups or individually based off of your teaching. Thanks, guys.